I usually have a good morning crowd, but this is something else. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Alan Tyson, and on November the 7th, 2007, I had the pleasure of interviewing Bruce Young about Coach Russell. The interview took place in Bruce's office in one of Statesboro's landmarks. Maybe you know it, Snooki's. My father and I started Snooki's in 1971. Coach said it was the home of the world's worst cup of coffee. Nobody argued with it. I think it was the best advertising I ever got. You know, I don't know what Statesboro would be like today if Coach Russell hadn't come here in 1981, or Dale Lick hadn't decided to restart football at Georgia Southern, or heck, if Vince Dooley had decided to stay at Georgia instead of leaving for Auburn. You know, I think most people think of him as a football coach, and that's what he was. But really, he was more than that. If I had to describe Coach Russell physically, well, he was a man's man is what he was. And I think the one trait that most people identify him with is his bald head. But if you didn't know him and you'd only heard of him, physically you might think he was 8 or 9 feet tall. But he wasn't. He was a normal, average person. And that's what he wanted to be. You know, I've seen him on so many occasions just sit around and talk to people. And at that point in time, that was the most important conversation he was involved in. And when they walked away from him, they felt like, you know, he was interested in what I had to say. As far as describing his personality, well, he was somewhat introverted. He didn't always initiate conversations, but he was always willing to enter into one and always had something he could add to it. He loved one-liner jokes, and he loved to laugh. I can still, to this day, I sit back there sometime, and I almost think I hear him laughing at me. Well, I met Coach Russell for the first time in 1965 when I went to Athens to play football at the University of Georgia. Of course, I didn't know him quite as well back then. He coached defense, and I played offense. And back then, your coaches were your coaches, and your players were your friends. I mean, he was a coach. If he told you to do something, you knew you better do it. But I always heard the defensive players talk about what Coach Russell had said. He was always telling some kind of funny story or funny joke. And I was jealous, really, because they had a relationship with somebody special. And then in 1980, there was talk going around that he was interested in the job down here. Well, I didn't believe it at first, so I called him. I called him on the phone and I said, Coach, I always called him Coach till the day he died. I never called him Erk to his face. I tried one time, but I just couldn't do it. But anyway, when I finally got him on the phone, I said, Coach, I said, this is Bruce Young down there in Statesboro. And there's rumors going around that you're interested in the job at Georgia Southern. And he said, well, what do you think? And I said, well, it's a win-win situation for me. I mean, I'm a Georgia graduate. So if you stay up there, I know they're going to do good, and I'll support Georgia. Of course, I earn my living in Statesboro, and that depends on how well the college does. So if you come here, that would be great. Are you interested? And he said, well, do you think folks in that area would support? And I said, yeah, I think there'd be a lot of support for it. And he said, well, what about athletes? You think we could get athletes? And I said, you know, yeah, we could get athletes, but the funny thing was he never would answer my question. But when I hung up the phone, I told my wife, I said, Carol, he's interested in this job.
Good evening. My name is David Murphyson, and tonight I would like to introduce you to Dr. Del Presley. 1969, Georgia Southern was coming out of a fairly dormant period, both academically and socially. Only at the end of Zach Henderson's 20-year administration as president did he allow fraternities and sororities. This made us resemble a modern American college. So in 1969, there was a spirit of change. And Dr. Idson, when he became president, focused on making Georgia Southern a university. And his successor, Dr. Pope Duncan, did the same thing. And that continued with some difficulties in 1977 when Dale Lick became the president. Now, Dr. Lick's idea was, well, we may not be a university yet, but at least we can act like one. So he enhanced the academic programs and encouraged innovations like the opening of the museum. And you know, we talk about Erk Russell's impact on integrating Georgia Southern. Dale Lick keenly believed in equality and affirmative action and focused on university status to move us at a faster pace in that area. So I'll have to give Dr. Lick credit for that. He did that despite the Board of Regents, who rebuffed his leadership. And you know, the big thing he did was to listen to the people of southeastern Georgia. He would have these forums, and he would talk about what Georgia Southern needed to do to become a university. He heard the same thing over and over again. He heard, you need to resurrect the football program, because that was such a key component of the Georgia Southern story in the 30s and 40s, before the program was suspended because of World War II. So that's how the football thing started. Dale Lick wanted to make us a university, and football was the way to do it. So I will have to give Dale Lick credit. And a lot of people worked with Dale behind the scenes to make it all happen. And Dale Lick got this group of local citizens, and they worked hard to raise money. They weren't deep pocket people, just ordinary people. Very enthusiastic people. Man, they got together, my goodness, things started to happen.
My name is Willa Smith, and I am pleased to perform Miss Kirby Lean Stevens. Well, I graduated from Georgia Southern in 1955 and came back in September to be the secretary to the president. I served under 7 presidents. 2 of them were acting, of course, but there were 7 of them. And I was in that position for 32 years. Then I served for 5 years in special projects and alumni relations. So when I retired in 1992, I had been at Georgia Southern for a total of 37 years, not even counting my time as a student. Now, when Dr. Lee started talking about football, I, in my brilliance, was opposed to it, and I told him so. Because they would say, oh, we'll get the money, but I didn't see any money. I didn't see anybody walking in saying, I'll give $1 million. So I was apprehensive. I didn't want us to be second class. So I told Dr. Lick, I'm opposed to it, but when you do it, not if, but when you do it, I'll be one of your strongest supporters. And I have been all for it, gung-ho. And I really enjoy all the coaches, save one, but nevertheless, never dreaming that we could hire Erk Russell away from Georgia.
My name is John Groover, and I'll be performing the memories of Erk Russell. At the University of Georgia, I held the same job that I held here at Southern, Vice President of Development and University Relations. At Georgia, my relationship with Erk was not the same as it was here. I mean, we had a few beers I considered Erk my best friend. I'm sure a lot of people considered him their best friend. And he probably was one of my greatest heroes. You know, good and nice are simple words, but they, more than anything else, describe Erk. His philosophy of coaching was do right. He practiced it, and he expected his players to practice it. I was at the hospital when he died. It was Gene, Tim Durden, Coach Van Gorder. About a month before he died, he sent me a handwritten letter. He kept me up to date on the regulars at Snookies and what was going on during the football off season. I spend my summers up in Michigan. Before I left, Erk had said he was going to write me every week. So he started out his letter by saying it was 8 weeks late. But I think you'd rather hear about my first football game up in Georgia in 1973. I was up in the president's box. I looked down along the sideline. There was this bald-headed man walking back and two. And he would take that bigger bald head and he'd begin to beat against the helmets of the players. And he kept beating their helmets until a small trickle of blood would start to come out of his forehead. And when they saw that blood, the linemen, I mean everybody, got all excited, got all fired up. And I turned to President Davidson and I said, who is that man? And what's his deal? President Davidson said, well, that's Erk Russell. He happens to be the best defensive coach in the United States. Now, when Dale Lick was president of Georgia Southern, he would arrive at my office in Athens unannounced, just to talk over a few things. I was doing free consulting for Georgia Southern before I even came here. And I will tell you that the two things that I suggested to him, he ignored. First, he wanted to have a capital campaign to raise $1 million for Southern. And I told him that the college was just not ready. Then he told me he wanted to start a football program. And I told him that was the dumbest idea I had ever heard. But what I didn't know is that he was going to come to Georgia and steal Erk Russell. And secondly, nobody, including Erk, knew what a great coach he was going to be.
I can still, to this day, I sit back there sometimes and I almost think I hear him laughing out here.
Something's happening, something's going on. Something's happening, something so strong. Something's happening, something all over the world.
Hey, how you doing?
Oh, hey. After my class this afternoon, I'm leaving.
My roommate Kevin knows a couple of guys in the house on Statesboro. He says they throw great parties. You should stay in town this weekend and hang out.
Nana, thanks.
But you go home every weekend.
Oh, I didn't say I was going home. My big sister goes to school in Athens, so I'm going to go up there and visit her. The city in Athens is so much better. As soon as I can, I'm going to transfer there.
You don't like Georgia Southern?
That's not it. I love Georgia Southern, actually, from Monday morning to Friday afternoon. I love my professors. Most of them. I mean, I don't want to sound cliche, but I want the marching bands, football games, people wearing school colors. So what if it's corny?
But,
What was that about?
They're talking about wanting football again.
I thought we were going to add a nursing program to become a university. Now explain to me how football is going to make any of that happen now.
Something's happening, something's going on.
You know, people came in and said, is it true? Is Erk Russell really coming? Hello, my name is Susan Jackson, and this is Alice Chastain. And still people come in and say, is it true? Well, where did he sit when he came in? And they'll see the newspaper articles and the magazine articles on the wall, and they'll sit right here. Well, they'll stand right here at this booth and read every article, word for word, just as, well, you know, well, I guess we'll get to that.
In 1980, Dr. Dale Lick, president of the college, hired David Bucky Wagner to be his athletic director. In October of that year, he appointed a committee to look into bringing football back to Georgia Southern. Between Dale, Bucky, and Rick Mandy's director of institutional development, the possibilities began to take shape.
Hi, my name is Mike Humphrey, and tonight I will be David Bucky Wagner. Well, what we needed was somebody with name recognition, because our program, well, you know, we didn't have a program. We were out raising money with Dale Lick, who was a very enthusiastic man, but he'd never played football. And Rick Mandy's the fundraiser. He'd never played football. I played it. Of course, nobody knew who I was then in the South.
Hello, I'm Glenn Spell, and I have the pleasure of portraying Mr. Rick Mandy's. So, Dale has been named the new president of Georgia Southern. He has flown down from Old Dominion, where he's still director, where he's still So Dale has flown down from Old Dominion, where he is still dean. And he's down here for the Schiegel Intercollegiate Golf Tournament. So he's sitting on a bench by himself, and up walks Newell D. Anderson. Now, get in mind, she's late 60s, elegant, beautiful, perfect Southern belle. The only thing missing was the parasol. So she walks up to Dale and she sits down, she says, President-elect Lick, I'm Newell D. Anderson. And he says, well, how nice of you to come out. She says, well, I have a purpose. Now, there are 3 things that you must accomplish during your presence at Georgia Southern. First of all, we must have university status. Now, she's saying that like we've got to put a baker on campus. And the second thing is that we just must have a standalone doctorate. And the third thing is that we just must have football. Now, those are the 3 things that you must accomplish during your presence. Well, Dale he's pale by this time. And he's sitting there holding on to the bench. But he comes down and he gets to work on the first 2. I mean, after all, the deans had said that we were going to be a university. And with just a little help, we can offer a doctorate of education, administration, or instruction. So, let's fast forward to 1979. Now, I take Dale down to Brunswick to speak to the Rotary Club. And we're headed back up Highway 17. And we're in my big old yellow Cadillac, which caused chagrin in all my children because it was awful. So we're easing up on the I-95, and Dale takes off his shoes and jumps up into the front seat of my car, Indian style, and says, let's talk about football. And before we got back to Statesboro, he had asked me to put together a feasibility study and a marketing survey. And that's how it all started. He got the faculty together, and he told them, and they harangued him. They said, you're going to run our institution. Where are you going to get the money? But he withstood it, and he gave them good answers. So he calls me a little later, and he says, I'm making an announcement tomorrow. We're starting football. And we started.
Well, now, Bruce's office is what we call the back room, and that's pretty much where football started, you know. Now, that little office is where they met to bring back football to Georgia Southern, and it all started right here with Bruce and Buck.
Yeah, I went to see Bruce, and that's when we put together the names of the Dirty Dozen who were going to go out and let people know we were interested in starting football. Now, the Dirty Dozen wasn't really a dozen. It was, I don't know, 8 or 9. There was me, of course, Bucky, Bruce, Bobby Underwood, who's passed away, Bobby Olive, Frank, he owned the lumber mill.
Pearson.
Frank Pearson, Cy Waters, I don't know, there was maybe 5, 6, or 7.
There was Bobby Underwood, Bobby Olive, Frank Pearson, Cy Waters, Sammy Johnson. There was Roy Akins, Al Burke, Hugh Colson, Jimmy DeLoach, Morris Lupton, Robert Lamb, Ronnie Pope, you and Bucky, of course, and Nate. How many is that? Did I leave anybody out?
Well, that's not a dozen.
Well, it's a baker's dozen.
Well, anyway, that's the names of those of us who went out to let people know we were really serious. And we worked for like 5 or 6 months going around doing the work that had to be done.
Well, we were pursuing, what we needed really most was somebody who had a name that was recognizable in the South. Somebody that everybody would know, household name. We've been talking to Red Parker. He was head coach at Clemson and then was head coach at the Citadel. He took the job, took it and refused it all in one day. We were talking to a fellow named Fulcher, used to coach at Georgia Tech. And then we were talking to that kid that played quarterback at Georgia.
Ray Goff.
Ray Goff. He was coaching over in South Carolina. And then, Burke and I were at a golf tournament down in Brunswick, Georgia. And at dinner that night, he looked over at me. He said, I was wondering, if you decide to start a football program at Georgia Southern, you give me a call. And I did. And I went up to talk to him in Athens, and he came down to Statesboro. Well, you know, if Erk was interested, he had the best name recognition of anybody.
Yeah, well, I interviewed Ray Goff, and he said, yeah, I'd like to be your coach, but the man you really ought to get is Coach Russell. So, anyway, what happened then was that Dooley pulled the Auburn trick. Now, Auburn had been after Dooley, and Georgia was getting ready to go to the Sugar Bowl, and President Fred Davidson calls Erk and says, look, if Vince goes to Auburn, you're the new coach. Well, it all turned out to be kind of a wanderlust. Vince wasn't going anywhere. But when you just think of how close he came to being the head coach at the University of Georgia. So anyway, Erk calls his good friend Frank Inman, who was the retired offensive coordinator from Georgia, and he said, Frank, find out if those folks down there at Georgia Southern are serious. Well, Frank immediately called Dale. Dale called me and Bucky. We thought he was kidding. We absolutely thought he was kidding.
Dale Lick had the courage and believability to ask Erk to come. Erk Russell would look people in the eyes to determine who they were and what they were up to. And Erk could tell that Dale was genuine and had no hidden agenda. Erk also knew that Dale Lick had done a lot of heavy lifting. For example, Erk knew that Dale had overridden the faculty senate. That famous opinion survey, well, it revealed that the students supported football and the community supported football, but not the faculty.
I really don't remember the first time that Coach Russell came into our office. If you read the history of the football program, you'll find that Dr. Lick led him away from campus. When he came to town for an interview, if he came in our office, it was after hours, and I was not there. But it was well into the decision-making process before I even knew he was going to be the coach. He was just in and out, unbeknownst to me. mean, it was really hush, hush everywhere. It wasn't that I was out of the loop, it was just the loop was so small, there were not a lot of people in the loop. I mean, Dr. Lick played in pretty close, except with those he was working with, like Boris Lupton and Rick Mandes, and the others that were in the Dirty Dozen. Now, they were the nucleus of the thing.
I let my family in on it at the time. And Deanne, who was my daughter, who was 16 at the time, she was just so over the idea of Erk coming. Erk was down, he was staying at the Holiday Inn, and Dale called me and said, can you get a ride with me? And I said, well, sure. So I picked Erk up, and we were on our way back home, and we were near the place where, the house where Deanne was babysitting. And now, picture this. Erk's got on, he's got on a white golf shirt, khakis, beautiful saddle Oxfords, great looking sports coat. I mean, you can imagine what a figure he cut that night. So, anyway, I told Erk, I said, do me a favor. So we pull up at the yard where Deanne's at, and we walk up to the front porch. I ring the bell, and I step aside, and Deanne comes to the door, and she says, oh my God, Coach Russell, oh my God, Coach Russell, please, please say you're going to come to Georgia Southern. And he said, Deanne, honey, I had one more remark like that, and I think I will come. Then I stepped back.
Well, I think one of the funniest stories I ever heard was Erk was coming down here to interview for the job. Or maybe he already had the job, I don't remember, but anyway, apparently he was speeding because Ted Reiner, who was the state patrolman at the time, stopped him, and he recognized him. He said, Coach, what's your hurry? And he said, well, I'm going down to Statesboro to talk about that job. And Ted said, well, don't let me stop you if you need to get on the road.
Now, I don't know where he was coming from, but he was late for a noon meeting with Dale Lick. And this was the first time they were going to meet in person. I mean, they talked on the phone several times. The Erk was running late, and it was Frank Edmonds' honor and integrity that had got him interested in this job to begin with. So anyway, he wanted to know if these folks were for real. So out about 20 miles from Statesboro, over in Kennerly County, just maybe on the other side of the meadow, it was a sheriff, or a sheriff's deputy, that pulled him over. Not a state trooper. And he said, Coach Russell, what in the world? And Erk says, man, I am late for a meeting. And the guy says, well, what is it? He says, well, I'm thinking about going over to Georgia Southern to coach football. And he said, well, go on. And if you get a ticket, call, here's my number, call me, we'll take care of it. But we need you, Coach Russell. Just don't kill yourself between here and Statesboro. Well, that's the first true story about any knowledge that Erk was coming.
You know, Mandes, you know all the stories. Why don't you tell them that story about Williamson?
Well, we had a meeting over at the Frank I. Williams Center. It was a Sunday morning. There was about 30 or 40 people there who were really interested in football at Georgia Southern. Now, I never will forget what a wonderful thing that Lucky did. Erk had just gotten up, and he had thanked everybody for coming out and to let people know he was seriously interested. And now it was a mesh of community people meeting Erk under controlled circumstances rather than a maddening crowd. And so Erk got up or sat down. When he finished anyway, Bucky stood up and he said, well, there's one thing I'd like to say, is that I just hope that we can change the cry of the eagle. And it just about brought the house down. It just about brought the house down.
And you can't talk somebody into leaving the assistant head coach's job at the University of Georgia unless they're ready to come. Now, Erk wanted to do something different. And what I tried to do was make sure that he didn't suffer because of it. You know, he'd just gotten a raise at the University of Georgia. And we offered him the same money he was making, maybe $1 or $2 more. And you know, having the restaurant here just kind of evolved into a place where he could start his day. And you know, I don't ever remember him asking for a thing. One thing we did know early on was he'd need a place to live, and the Southern Boosters kind of took care of that. But you know, I remember Cy Waters got him a freezer, and Cohen Anderson filled it with a side of beef.
Yeah, Erk wasn't playing hard to get. He was struggling with equity in his house, and he knew we didn't have anything to offer here. I mean, he was going to have to play on the high school football field. What do we really have to offer him? So anyway, I called Erk early one Thursday morning. He said, "Okay, Mandy's, what you got this time?" And I said, "Well, let me tell you the story." Well, at that time, J. Robert Smith was pastor of the First Baptist Church in Thompson, Georgia. And Jack Nelson Averitt was dean of the graduate school and head of the pulpit committee at First Baptist Church here. Well, First Baptist had been after J. Robert, and he just kept saying, "Look, I got a great parish, got great parishioners, great parsonage." Well, First Baptist just wouldn't give up, and they, the last time they went to see him, it was an evening service, and after the service, J. Robert and his wife had the pulpit committee over for pie and coffee, and as they were leaving, Dr. Averitt, he calls J. Robert over to the side, and he says, "I know you have everything you need here, but there's one thing that you have, or that we have, that you don't have here. We need you. We need you." So I said to her, "Man, you got it made up there. Great jets, great helmets, great football stadium, but there's one thing that we got that you ain't got there. We need you. We need you." Well, Erk called David, and he said, "Coach Lee, if you can offer me $1 more that I'm making at the University of Georgia, I'm coming." So the next morning, Erk calls me. He says, "Mandy's, put something together for Saturday morning. I'm coming down. And I just want a place to let people know I'm changing colors and I ain't wasting time." Well, Erk came in that night. We rode around, drank a six-pack. And then on Saturday morning, we walked into the Kennerly Lounge, and there were 400 or 500 people